Welcome to Theory in 3, where we're going to learn the essentials of music theory for guitar in about 3 minutes. So last time we talked about intervals and how intervals were made up, and we said that interval names are based on the major scale, but the major scale itself is based on a series of whole steps and half steps that's always the same. It always goes whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Always the same order. In the major scale, the root, the fourth, the fifth, and the octave, I should say, are all called perfect intervals. And if you take the perfect interval and you raise it by a half step, we augment it, we make it bigger. If you lower it by a half step, it becomes diminished. And then if you take the major intervals, which are second, third, sixth, and seventh, and lower those by a half step, they're called minor intervals. Now I should say also, if you take a major interval and you raise it a half step, you make it bigger, it becomes augmented. If you take a minor interval and you lower it by a half step, it becomes diminished. All right, now that takes us into a concept called enharmonics, enharmonic. And all that simply means is that one note can have several names. So if we went up the C scale and we went to the note F, 1, 2, 3, 4, it's a fourth, it's a perfect fourth. If I raise that by a half step to the note F sharp, that's an augmented fourth. Now if I go to the note G, C, D, E, F, G, that's a fifth. If I lower it by a half step, it's called a G flat, that's a diminished fifth. But you'll notice something, F sharp and G flat are the same note. It's different note names, but the same note. And all notes can have several different names. That C note itself could be called a B sharp, depending on the harmonic situation we're in and the key signature they're in. But I would say most of the time in any piece of music, most of the notes are going to be the notes that are in the key signature of the major scale. So if you're in the key of C, most of the notes are going to be C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and C. All right, now that takes us into something called diatonic versus chromatic intervals. Any note that is a part of the major scale of the piece itself is called a diatonic note. So let's say that we're in the key of C, and again, if we went up whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, we get C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. All of those notes are called diatonic notes. If you change any of those notes, they become chromatic notes. So if I went from C to D flat instead of D natural, that's a chromatic note. Now, you often use chromatic notes to move somewhere in music because they sound unresolved and they sound tense. So if I played a C major chord and I put an F sharp note in it somewhere, if I can do this, you hear that clang that it has, and it has a certain tension that it needs to resolve. Now, those tensions that need to resolve, oftentimes that chromatic approach note are used to move chords to another chord. So for instance, normally in C, I'd go from C to A minor to D minor, which is all part of the key. But if I went from C and played a C sharp note, which is a chromatic note, you can hear how it wants to fall on that note. More on that later, but hopefully that helped you to understand the difference between diatonic and chromatic and how enharmonics can be the same note sound, but a different note name. Until next time, God bless.